We would like some help with our eloquence this afternoon. It's kind of a hot day. In the Brythonic tradition, the old bards tell us that one way to open the portals and gather the ancestors close is to sing. So I'm hoping that you might be up for doing a little bit of that. Would you? So can I ask you to stand up, if that's okay? And I'm just going to call for some eloquence while you sing. And we're going to sing a drone. So if this half, if you can sing a drone like a hive of bees on a Neiniau a theidiau, Cyndeidiau y ddeiar, awyr, y tân a'r dyfroedd. Byddwch gyda ni prynhawn yma, rhowch grym i'n geiriau, rhowch glywed i'n geiriau. Grandmothers and grandfathers, ancestors of the earth, of the air, of fire and of the depths. Be with us this afternoon, give us eloquence and our words power and our listening openness so that what needs to be said and communicated at this time is shared among us. Diolch. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr. So our plan with this session really is to each speak for about 10 minutes, talking about the different aspects of the native traditions of the British Isles. And I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the animate roots of it all. And then to spend as much time as possible open to the floor for questions, because that's one of the ways that we get to know what you really want to know. So if that seems okay, and then we'll do a closing together as well at the end. So I was about 7 or 8 years old, and probably like many of you, ran around in the woods, had a lovely time as a child playing. How many of you did that and had a really wild imagination and felt at one with all things until somebody came and told you that the world doesn't quite work like that? Not to be silly, not to be a dreamer. How many of you had that kind of closing down experience? Yeah. So I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I was playing hide and seek with my cousins in the woods where my father grew up. And my cousin was counting, and I was kind of running to find a good hiding place. And I ran further into the woods than I'd gone before, and I stopped dead at this beautiful clearing of trees, almost a perfect circle as I remember it. And I stepped into it, and it was sunny, and there was a shaft of light, and I have a very visceral memory of feeling plugged into absolutely everything, and just freezing and sensing that this was very precious and fragile. And then, of course, momentarily, as soon as I'd kind of grasped onto it, it had gone again. And walking out of that glade and knowing myself at some point, at some very early childhood basis of feeling different, that I'd touched into something that was profound. And the next Sunday, being Welsh, went to Sunday school, good chapel girl, and I went to my minister. He was a lovely guy, and said, I think I met God in the woods last week. And he said, no, I don't think so. And you know those things that happen in life that you think, well, actually, it was a sad moment, but actually it set me on a path, because I was determined that I would find a way back to that feeling. And it sent me off, first of all, to libraries. And at the time in Wales, you couldn't find anything about paganism or anything like that in the library, but I did find a book about the Celts. And then a few years later about herbalism. And the journey continued until eventually I found myself being initiated into high magic, and then later into Wicca and Druidry, and exploring shamanism, but always feeling that I remember being once in a woods near Cheltenham and evoking the great classical gods, Aphrodite and things, and suddenly thinking, hang on, I know the names of the gods of this place. I grew up in Welsh school. We were taught all our myths and legends, and the poets talk about all these great things. What are we doing here? And so from that point on, really, I started to explore the story here in the British Isles and trying to piece together the very fragile, tattered fragments of a tradition, a pre-Christian tradition here that nobody at the time was really talking about. Certainly in Wales, it wasn't something that you could easily talk about. Not to the grown-ups anyway, but thankfully now in this generation, there are more people exploring these things. And what I found, in short, was that, like most cultures, our first instinct as human beings is to find awe and spirit and the all that is in nature, in the things that are around us. Our primary connection, our lifeblood is that connection, if you like. And so much of the malaise of today feels like a lack of that connection, the separation that we've created for ourselves. And bit by bit, you know, we do all these ceremonies and they're really important. But what all of the stories tell us, it's about reciprocity. It's about treating each other and the land as if it's alive and ensouled, and as if there are relationships to be built, and to continue to do that and to listen really, really deeply. And to play. To remember how to play in nature and be creative, to dream in nature, to be with it as companion, rather than as always wanting something from it. And so, you know, one of the lovely, I think actually you told me this, there was a lovely definition of ceremony or ritual that you had, was something about how adults play with the universe, something like that. It wasn't? Should have been, okay. But I think it's a lovely way of thinking about it. How grown-ups play and be creative with the universe is ceremony and ritual. We've lost so much of our sense of what that is because we tend to think about it as church ritual. But ceremony, from an indigenous perspective, can be many, many, many things. And I suppose I'm here today holding the door open, saying, I know there are lots of people looking. I know lots of people are looking elsewhere for a tradition, desperate for a way back, and just saying there is a beautiful tradition here. It is fragmented, but you know, nobody gave our forefathers the book of how it was done. And I think we have some license to look at all the really ancient stuff, the myths, the legends, what the bards and the poets have left for us, and to intuit with some knowledge together to find what of that and what the old practices still serve us today. And I think I'm probably coming close to time, so I think I'm handing over to you.
Hello, everyone. Well, like Angharad, I was 5. I grew up in a very urban environment in Notting Hill Gate, and when I was 5, my family went on holiday to the Black Forest, and when they parked by the forest, I apparently took off, and they had to go and find. I just remember being entranced and just disappearing into the forest. I was brought back, and it was when I was 11 that my father introduced me to the old chief druid, who he knew as a friend. So he was a family friend. So, and he also introduced me to Buddhism because he also knew this chap called Christmas Humphreys, who had started the Buddhist Society in London. So from that early age, I read a book called The Life of the Buddha. And I thought, this is the only journey worth taking, a journey of enlightenment. But at the same time, this kind of magic of the Druids also appealed to me. So there were these two kind of twin tracks running in me. A part of me that wanted to kind of I suppose, withdraw from the world in a way and to seek enlightenment, and another part that felt very drawn to going into the world. And so when I was 16, I started training with the old chief druid. And it was a time when, everybody was smoking pot, including me. And then we started taking LSD. So it was back in the sort of early 70s. And these wonderful mystical experiences. And I remember taking LSD in a garden in Suffolk and having this wonderful experience of connection with the natural world. And then it was as if I had this experience, this very strong, powerful, mystical experience, if you like, and then this much more watered down, if you like, a much more limited experience of magical work in Druidry at that time, later in Wicca, which had quite a strong kind of inheritance from the whole Western mystery tradition, but also kind of, Victorian occultism and the Order of the Golden Dawn and, Gerald Gardner. And my teacher, he was kind of 20 years younger than I am now, but he seemed like this terribly old man when I was a kid. And he was in his 50s or something. And he was kind of really old fashioned. And so I had this kind of tension through my adolescence of sitting around with my friends getting very high and then taking the tube to West Kensington and engaging in an occult ceremony, in a sort of druid ceremony in a room in London. And so in a way that tension is a rather interesting one, because it's one we all have between the mystical experience, that sense of oneness with each other and with the natural world, and also all the kind of limitations and frustrations of functioning in modern 20th century then society. And at a certain time, well, really from that moment, really, that became of prime interest to me, that rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as most of my friends did, they all thought I was crazy following the sort of magical way, because they're just these sort of stuffy old people doing bits of magic, when all you had to do is have a puff and off you go. But I could sense there was some real potential there. And so over the years, I've been working in the Druid tradition. And really, what I've come to conclude is that is precisely as Angharad said, is that there's this, and this is really the point of our meeting, I think, together, is that that beneath the surface, right here, in these lands, these islands, there's this tremendous tradition. There's this tremendous tradition, and even if we're interested in Eastern traditions, as I was and still am, there's this extraordinary root that goes back to our Indo-European origins, and there's a whole bunch of information about that, which we might get to talking about. But so that they're not incompatible. It's not an entirely different stream. And the particular appeal for me of the Druid tradition is the way that it combines both a magical understanding of the natural world and a desire to be attuned with it, following the cycles of nature, celebrating the solstices and the equinoxes and the cross-quarter days and so on, reverencing the directions and so on. But also the way in which within that there is also this celebration of the arts. There's this whole bardic tradition. So in our ceremonies, we include poetry and song and story and music. So there's this celebration of the arts, so that it's no longer a kind of tension between me as a product of human civilization with my interest in the arts, and a kind of wild man inside me that just wants to get back to roots, that I can kind of allow the, if you like, cultured self to exist alongside the wild animal self, if you like. But rather interestingly as well, into that, within Druidry, is woven the strand of shamanism. So there's the Bardic tradition, but there's also the ovate tradition, the tradition that sees time as being far more mysterious and plastic in the best sense of the word. What's a better word than plastic? Malleable. Malleable than it appears, and that we can drop in by using oracles, by using trance, by taking journeys, by going on vision quests. We can drop beneath that linear surface of time and be inspired and bring something back from the other world to bring us healing and strength and inspiration. So an interesting concatenation, an interesting weaving of influences, which in modern day Druidry also includes in a sense, a kind of confluence of a lot of strands of the Western mystery tradition, including the magical traditions of that have come out of the Golden Dawn and all the rest of it. It's an interesting weave. So that's the kind of field that I've been working in. And in addition to that, what I've found as well, training in psychotherapy and psychology, and in particular in psychosynthesis, which is a form of transpersonal or spiritual psychology, the insights of that perspective actually illuminate all this. It doesn't cast a light that shows it all to be illusory and delusional. Instead, it informs it with a kind of modern day understanding of the psychodynamics that are occurring within the process. So, yeah, so that's the sort of field that I work in.
Philip. So I suppose we're sharing our defining moments with nature, those moments when we come back home to ourselves and to the web of life. And it was lovely hearing both of your moments. And mine was much later in life. So I didn't really grow up. I grew up in a kind of town. I was quite focused on school and kind of academic focused stuff. I didn't spend so much time in the forest. And then after many, many years of kind of being in the academic world, in a very fascinating part of it, I was working in psychedelic clinical trials, all about magic and actually all about nature and the web of life as well. But that was more subtle at that point. And then I had this kind of defining moment when there was a kind of crisis point where I recognized that, as wonderful as science is and as incredible the discoveries have been, it's also part of the kind of dominator hierarchy system with capitalist influences and corporate influences, and it's not immune to the kind of, the overall dominant structure that so many of us are struggling with and our ecosystems are struggling with. So I had a kind of defining moment of recognizing the dangers of those systems and the limits and the ruthlessness of those systems as well. And in a moment of shocking realization, I fled down into a garden and I stumbled into a maple tree. And I had an experience, probably the only experience I've ever had of real animism, where I experienced the tree as a being that was holding me. And I was really crying and really weeping and really frustrated with the system and the patriarchy, and screaming my rage into the roots of this tree. And I felt held, and I felt the depth of the roots. And so whereas your example of being in the forest and feeling that you were speaking to God, that awe and majesty, you were kind of going to the up and I was going to the down. I was going to that place where we're really lost and hopeless, and nature holds us. And we can feel the depth of the roots and feel the solidity of the earth. And I think from that experience, it was completely life-changing. And then I left academia and left psychedelic research in a clinical context and started creating a community that was for people that have had psychedelic experiences, so that we could focus on building our sense of connectedness to each other, to nature, to the web of life. And I guess the three things, I mean, there's so much to say about it, but I'm going to be brief. But I suppose really, you know, there's a bit of magic, there's a bit of lots of tree worship, obviously, and lots of music and song and lots of ways that we integrate our experiences through. We do a bit of wood whittling and a bit of, this is all new since the last time you heard about it, and dancing together, but also lots of visualization and breath work. And but overall, the kind of the three themes really are connecting to nature, and by that we connect to the trees. So we follow a structure where every month we connect to a different tree, and that tree is our teacher, and we spend all month with the theme of that tree and the essence of that tree, and we really stay with it together, and we go really deep with the theme. And then we come round every time we come to January, it's always the silver birch. And so it's this framework that we can all keep and follow. Even when we've left the community, we can take it out into the world with us, introduce it to our local communities. So we have this deep connection to the trees and to the learnings from the trees, and the what the trees teach us about community, the interconnectedness of the mycelium, the way that trees turn mud into sap that makes the flowers grow, that the gristle, the mud, the difficult stuff of our lives, the crises points, that we can turn that into our passion and our purpose and what we want to stand for. And we do that together, much easier to do together than on your own. And so that's the first thing, the connection to nature, connection to the trees. The second thing is connection to community. And with that, we develop these very deep friendships with each other, and it's mostly online, people all over the world that are interested in psychedelics and nature, which I've realized is an amazing combination. The people that come to us who are interested in psychedelics and nature, it tends to be just a really, it's a wonderful group of people. And so that's the second thing, connection to community. But the third thing is connection to eldership, and I think that's another thing that we've lost. So if we're thinking about what we've lost in our kind of modern consumer, numbing based culture, where we've fed all these things to help us numb and distract, but very few things to help us to connect and engage. In this kind of very numbing culture, we've lost our connection to our elders, to our ancestors, as well as our connection to nature and connection to community. So connection to eldership is really giving us a way to become elders ourselves. So we follow this process of the 12 trees round and round, and we now have people that have been with us for a couple of years, and they are our elders, and they're starting to offer the practices and the tools and the ideas to their local communities. And it's this idea of being in service, because I think you talked about reciprocity, Angharad, and so much of, when I talk to people about, we have this kind of community, and it's kind of like self-development, it's this kind of like icky idea of like, how can I get better, how can I optimize myself, how can I consume a bit more of these ideas to make myself better. And what we focus on is it's an integration community, but what we focus on as well is outegration, which is the idea that once you've been around the 12 trees and once you've learned from each other and from nature and you've integrated all that wisdom into yourself, you give those gifts back out to your local community. So you integrate and then you outegrate. And that's an example of just a little way that we can become elders in our lives. So please look it up, ASA Integration. We have a website and we're accepting new people into our community very soon. So thank you very much. And over to you, Andy.
Thank you. I'm loving all these books hanging from the ceiling. It's making me feel at home. I have a serious book addiction. I buy too many books. I'm a scholar, so it's sort of my job to read books with long, very boring titles. And here's a dreadful confession for a scholar. I know deep down that the answer I'm looking for is not going to be found in the pages of a book, and yet still I continue buying them and reading them. Book knowledge is wonderful. We wouldn't be here without book knowledge. This technology we're using is all thanks to book knowledge, but it comes at a cost. And the cost is that we distance ourselves from the world, and we think that knowledge is something that we look at from afar. It's very helpful. We can separate this from that and get our thoughts in order, but somehow there's a kind of distance from the world. And I think what we're talking about here today is a different kind of knowledge, different way of knowing the world. And I sometimes make the distinction between law, L-A-W, as in scientific laws, and lore, L-O-R-E, the law of the land. Anyway, that's a preamble. I had an epiphany on the way to the toilet this morning. 7 o'clock, I'm an early riser, walking down to the toilet, and I stopped in my tracks because I heard something very ordinary and very extraordinary. I heard a bird singing. Now, I know you're all good medicine folk, and I know you've heard the wonder of birdsong, and you know it's the thumbprint of God. I know that. That's not what I mean by it being extraordinary. Why it's extraordinary, it was a robin singing. And robins have two songs. Did you know that? Robins have two songs. For those of you who aren't from these lands, robins are these lovely little birds. They've got red breasts, often seen on Christmas cards. Allegedly the national bird of England, I think, voted. They have two songs. They have a winter song and a summer song. And their summer song stops in June because bird breeding season is over and all the birds start molting. And today I heard the winter song. Today is the moment where the robins think that the seasons are changing. I know it's hard to believe. It's a baking hot day, beautiful golden sunshine, but the seasons are turning. It's announced, it's heralded by this tiny little bird, the winter song of the robin. Isn't that beautiful? So I stopped in my tracks because I wasn't listening for it, but some part of me went, the winter song, there it is. And if you go down to the toilets down there, you'll hear the robins singing. Or in the glade, you can hear it in the glade. The law that I'm talking about, not this stuff, not the book law, the law opens up, I think, in that space between us and the other, whether it's a robin or a maple tree or the Black Forest or the wilds of Wales. That's the space, that's the circuit. When we give our attention to the other, that's the gap into which the law that we're looking for falls. So imagine if we were all, it was just part of our culture. We had Winter Robin Song Day. And when we hear it, we have a feast, or maybe we put out food for the robins, or maybe we dress up as robins and we dance until we're foaming at the mouth as a way of giving something back. This is your idea of creativity. Our law is so fragmentary because every time it built up, it got cut back down again by the Romans, by the Normans, by the Reformation, by industrialization. It's in fragments. We can find some of the fragments in the books. But to feel it, we have to open up that space with the other. We have to listen. We have to give our attention to the maple trees, to the oak trees, to the robins. We have to know it so that we're stopped in our tracks because we feel it. That's where law operates. And so it can feel like the traditions of these lands are lost in the mists of time. They're far away. We've forgotten them. We don't know what's left. At the same time, it's as far away as a blade of grass because it's in that space that opens up when we give our attention to the robins and the maple trees and the seasons and the wind. So that's all I wanted to say, really. So thank you for listening.
So I think it's time to hear from you. What do you want to ask? I think there are some people with microphones, roving microphones.
Just while the microphones are coming, just a couple of things occurred to me. One is to start a new movement, like AA, but BAA, Book Addicts Anonymous, where we gather in circles, we say, I bought another one, and it's so interesting. I'd go to regular meetings.
I've stayed in your house, so you suffer the same problem.
I suffer the same problem, yeah.
I have the same kind of approach to a book as I do to a tree. I just go and sit with it. I don't actually read it. I just kind of assume that just by having it in my house, that somehow by osmosis, it's going to kind of get into my head.
And if I could just say another thing, but reminded when we were talking the other day, Andy, and you said something that I think is really pertinent to the topic today. You said how, when I was young, our gaze was to the east. The 60s, 70s, 80s, we were looking to the east. That was exotic and interesting, and, all the Dharmic tradition, Buddhism and so on. Now, a lot of our gazes are pointing to the west, to South America. And this is all splendid and fine. But what's really interesting to do is to turn the gaze to the earth beneath us as well, and the land around us. Yeah.
Do we have a roving mic or?
There's a lady over there that's been had a hand up for a while.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I have a mic, so apparently I'm meant to speak. Thanks, guys, for all of that. Really interesting. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, particularly to the history of the Druidic tradition in these lands and how it evolved, and particularly how the specific uniqueness of these lands gave rise to specific ancestral traditions.
Do you want to take that?
Shall I? Okay. Yes. Imagine the changing, the ice sheets gradually moving off of Britain. The tribes coming from Europe into the British Isles. And way across to Ireland and so on. And it seems that the first spiritual and religious practices would have been animistic, probably goddess-oriented. We don't know. Fast forward thousands of years, the stone circle building culture, this extraordinary network of monoliths built in these lands. And at a certain point, and you're talking, I'm terrible about dates, but probably something like 3,000 years ago, amongst these movements, you have this group of people that we know about from the classical writers, who are called Druids, and a sort of priestly caste. And so there's some information we have from the classical writers, and this flourished, this movement flourished up until really the 6th century, wouldn't you say? Angharad's the historian more than I am, but I think about towards the 6th century, the Romans actually tolerated Druidism because they had a general policy of tolerating cults. That's how they managed to, expand their empire, because they realized that if they fought every single cult, they'd, so they tolerate. And they only turned against the Druids twice in Britain. Once when there was Boudicca's rebellion, and they attacked her, fought her back, and there was one other time. But otherwise, Druidism was tolerated. So it was with the coming of Christianity, who had a different agenda. They had a monopolist agenda, and around the 6th century, you had. Christianity took over, but there was, if you can imagine, a sort of huge door closing around the 6th century, and some of that lore, L-O-R-E, managed to slip through that door because of Christianity's love affair with paganism, as Ronald Hutton, the historian, calls it, and it's a passionate, rather difficult love affair, and one that, so the Christian scholars were very interested in the old stories. So they wrote some of this down. Some of the lore survived thanks to the scribes and clerics. Fast forward 1,000 years to the 17th century, 18th century, and the traditions that the Druids worked with were either repressed or carried on in all sorts of different ways underground, and coming out in different sort of customs and folklore, preserved in folklore and tradition and so on. And then in the 18th century, really, 17th, 18th, 19th, in sort of different ways, you can pick certain points, there was this, as the Enlightenment came and the grip of Christianity was loosened because of the Enlightenment, people started to look to their ancestors and started to question what's called the Dummheit theory, the theory of original stupidity, which is that we were grunting savages until the Bible appeared and we became civilized. They started to question that theory and started to think, well, maybe our pre-Christian ancestors were civilized. And then there was this period known as the Druid revival, which is about, so over the last 300 years, there's been a lot of scholarship, lots of confusion and lots of strange scholarship and misguided ideas and fantasy and so on, but nevertheless in a sort of strange kind of way part of the tradition. So we have 300 years of recorded history. And then towards the end of the 20th century, as we really moved into the, from the 1970s onwards, the kind of first of all, the sort of flower power, followed by the environment, the revival of an interest in indigenous traditions and native traditions, kind of produced a surge of interest again. To have a kind of second wave of the Druid revival, which has managed to shake off a lot of the accretions of the earlier revival period, until you find a kind of living spirituality. And so that's one way of looking at it in a timeline going from the past to the future. But I also like to turn that on its head and imagine that Druidry is coming to us from the future rather than the past. And that, what if it's our potential, and that the voices we're hearing aren't necessarily from the past, but perhaps are coming from the future.
Amazing. Great. Sorry. So I am originally from Zimbabwe and South Africa, and I grew up there until I was 15. I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, but it's just been natural to me to herald the sun and listen to the wind and be grateful when it rains and feel one with the natural world. And then I moved to England, and I just remember that not being the vibe. And so, yeah, and then really randomly, so I'm Samantha Moyo is my surname, but then really randomly, I found out that my real surname is Steele, and that my real grandfather, went to Zimbabwe, slept with my grandmother when it was illegal for black and white people to get together, had my dad, and they hid it basically from everyone. So I'm a Moyo and I'm also a Steele. And I've been sort of like hiding that part of me because I'm a little bit of, no offense everyone, but I'm a little bit ashamed of British history. It's not something I do a lot of decolonization work, same animism, reclaim your power. But this is a real part of me. And I guess what I wanted to ask today is, I guess I would like a positive story of this ancestry, this part of me, because I feel like it's time for me to add that Steele name to me and be proud of it and be a Moyo Steele. So I just wondered if anyone might have anything to help me along with this, because I'm sure Michael Steele was a lovely man, and I want to be a proud Afro-Brit and be an animist and love the land and not feel ancestral shame, basically.
Ancestry is such a complex thing. I don't imagine that there's anybody sitting in this space that doesn't have something difficult in the ancestry if you go back far enough. And I think some of the work that we're called to today is to lay some of that to rest and to kind of clear the way for moving forward with lighter shoulders and kind of greater kind of humanity between us. If we go back in time, pre-industrial revolution, pre the Victorian age, when the whole thing with kind of Britain and dominance and things really got going, which happened across Europe, actually, it wasn't just Britain. We start to get back to a much simpler time. But there was, let's be real about this, there were people the tribes that were in Britain were battling against each other. And then the Romans came, and for a little while they mostly joined together against the Roman forces. And before then, there would always been tribalism. So it's really, really complex. We've all got murderers and rapists and somewhere in our background. But the question you're asking, I think, is how can I find my feet on the land here and be and unite both of me? And I think the land is the thing. The land, the spirit of the land is the spirit of the land is the spirit of the land. And personally, I think in these times, if we can love and cherish the piece of land that we find ourselves on right now and build a relationship with it, and build a relationship with our ancestors in all their wisdom, in all their difficulty as well. Because who we are at any one point is part of that. I know myself because the land that I'm on knows me, and my ancestors know me, and they reflect back to me who I am, and my friends in this kind of realm know me. And so it's a really interesting dynamic. I don't think that we can be indivisible, or we shouldn't be. I think we've found ways of being, but it's detrimental. But we are actually indivisible from the land and the landscape upon which we stand. And I think we have a responsibility to ourselves, to each other, and to the land. And what amazing change that would be if each one of us really built a relationship with our square mile and with the community of that square mile, and cherished it and moved towards a relationship of reciprocity with it, which is what, when Andy talks about the L-O-R-E in all the mythology, in all the writings, in all the fragments that are left to us, the thing that the old ones, the Kavaruidion, the storytellers of my tradition, tell us, the medicine that is in there has to be about equality and reciprocity with each other, between masculine and feminine, between the natural world and us, between the other world and us, all things in balance. And I'm really sorry that there wasn't, when you came here, that very natural animistic thing. That's what it is like for most people growing up here. And that's what, if there's any movement that I'd like to begin, it's that we can all feel comfortable honoring the sunlight, honoring the earth, making offerings to a tree, having conversations, sinking into nature in collaboration. I hope you can kind of feel that you're starting to find that, but I wish you luck with your journey.
Hi there. I think I've got the microphone over here. Hi. We've been talking about animistic belief systems here, and we're at Medicine Festival. And I'm just interested in hearing if you think sort of animistic belief systems of these lands, sort of paganism, druidry, do psychedelics play a part in that? If so, which psychedelics play a part, and how specifically do you think people should use them?
Thanks, Greg. I'll pay you later. The question of whether people have been using psychedelics in these lands is contested. There's remarkably little evidence. There's an absence of evidence. how can I go further without punting my book, nearly 20 years old, Shroom, A Cultural History of the Magic Mushroom, available from all good booksellers. There's an absence of evidence. It'd be lovely to think that the people who built Stonehenge and the Druids were taking magic mushrooms. And they may well have been, but we simply don't know. And some people argue that they did, and some people argue equally vehemently that they didn't. So we're doing that on the basis of no evidence. But I think your question was more about should. Sorry, too many thoughts in my head. There's a sort of, there's a part of us that always wants there to be some long, unbroken tradition to justify what we do. And that tendency is in itself ancient. In late antiquity, people were inventing great long traditions to justify their spiritual practices. We don't need long traditions to justify anything, because as your question was getting at, a lot of what was done in the past we don't want to bring to the present. So we can make stuff up, and that's okay. And we have psychedelics that are part of our flora and mycology, and they're very useful tools. They're very useful tools. So the question of whether or not there's historical justification for that, I think, is slightly irrelevant. The question is, do we want to be using them now? My sense is that, so I've got a paper that's just come out in a book, an academic anthropological study of contemporary Druidry. And I was looking at the use of psychedelics amongst contemporary Druids. And it's still quite underground, I think, within contemporary Druidry. But what I observed was that lots and lots of people, as Philip said, are going off to the Amazon. They're doing their medicine ceremonies. They're going off to Gabon. They're being initiated into Bawiti. They're going off to Mexico and doing peyote and San Pedro. And then they're coming back and going, what's our vessel? What's our container? What should we be doing here? And a number of people have started looking to Druidry and the Druid tradition to create medicine ceremonies to hold the use of psychedelics here. So it's absolutely something that people can do. They can do safely and securely, and Druidry offers that kind of container. It's not necessarily something people should be doing. And I'm a great believer that you've got to want to do psychedelics. It shouldn't be something that you have to do. Angharad, do you want to?
My training through my younger years was quite prohibitive around psychedelics. It was, you have to do the work, do the training, find your way, using your imagination, using your will, using ceremony, using the old processes to get to that open place, to that connectivity, if you like. However, most people who have an experience with psychedelics, it can feel as if it's a big step forward. And once you've had that experience, some people then go and find the spiritual path to it. So it's a really difficult question, the should and the could. I think it's a very personal journey. From a did we use psychedelics? I find it incredibly difficult to believe that our hunter-gatherer and kind of, Mesolithic and Neolithic forefathers who knew far more about plants than we do today did not trip across a magic mushroom and go, this is going to be really helpful in the British winter. It appears at a time which goes into autumn and winter, which is quite difficult. Historically, it would have been a time when the raiding and the warriors would have been coming home with whatever trauma they were bringing back. It might have been used for integration. We don't know. It feels as if it could have been. But certainly, I don't think that it was necessarily something that was I think we'd find it in the archaeological record if it was widely used. I think it's more likely that it was used specifically for specific purposes, but that's just an inkling, and I can't tell you the archaeological or the historical kind of relevance for that. And as Andy says, we don't have any evidence of it. But
and could I say, of course, the difficulty with this format is it suggests that we have sort of privileged knowledge. That, I mean, it just suggests that it's not true. That the knowledge and the wisdom isn't in the room too. And so perhaps I'd like to turn that question around on the questioner and ask the questioner whether how he feels about his own. I don't know where are you? There you are. Could I turn it around on you? What's your experience of it? What are your thoughts on that question?
I think you're right, Andy, in as much as, people have been travelling to South America, to various different parts of the world and coming back and going, well, what have we got? And the obvious one is psilocybin, isn't it? It's obviously magic mushrooms, or fly agarics as well. But also, anything that goes into a witch's flying ointment is potentially potent plant material to be exploring. But it's more in terms of the design that we've collected from South America, the design of the ceremony, of how to hold a ceremony of 40 people in a room that have never taken psychedelics before, and you're going to give them a load of magic mushrooms. How do you handle that room? And it's like that sort of design, I think, is really useful and generic to wherever you are. And I think Druidry and paganism can potentially add some flavour to that in terms of what do we have in this land? What's the flavour of this land that we can add to that psychedelic cauldron of opportunity? How we do it, I think, is up to the previous chosen chief of the Order of Bardics and Druids, who's got far more experience of that than I have.
I would say that how it's done is actually more up to a dialogue between us and the mushrooms. And the nature of the Liberty Cap is it's a tricksy leprechaun, and ceremonies can very swiftly descend into chaos. But maybe that's the medicine that we need, is to remember to laugh until the tears are rolling down our cheeks. I don't know.
I think
tricksy question.
Yes. A couple of thoughts just come to me about what's going on in terms of ceremony. I mean, the one key element is the anchoring in the other world, and a real sense of the other world, and a belief, if you like, if you think in terms of set and setting, the importance of setting. This core belief in the reality of the other world, in the presence of beneficent spirits, and so on, can be a really important kind of anchoring. The concept of the circle, the sacred circle, the honouring of the directions, which you find in so many traditions, and you find in Druidry, a knowledge of the local spirits of the land, honouring of place, the specific place you are, and the geographical features and so on, and the gods and goddesses. All these things can provide a level of safety and containment that can be extremely helpful, I think. And these primal elements of fire and water and earth and so on can be helpful, and they're expressed in a kind of language that is in synchrony with this land, rather than it being, rather than any issues of cultural appropriation or of it being kind of coming from the outside and being imposed as a structure, all the while bearing in mind, what Andy was saying about the individual and so on. Yeah.
And also bearing in mind that they're still illegal in this country. So with the place we're at right now, I think I don't know if we're quite ready for that yet. I think my background was using psilocybin with people with treatment-resistant depression who would never have wanted to take it in a spiritual context, because it would have been I think for most of them, quite kind of intimidating and scary to do it that way. So I think, yeah, remembering the diversity of different people and different kind of approaches. And at the moment within the psychedelic world, there is this real focus on focusing on the outcomes of the trials and keeping it very, very distinct from spiritual practice, because there is this kind of larger program of bringing psychedelics into the mainstream, and initially for the people who are suffering the most from mental health difficulties. So I suppose it's a timing thing, and if the spiritual traditions of our lands can be kind of gathering and constellating and planning, then I think there will be a time when that's ready. But I think it might still be quite a long way away. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, certainly, in as much as for something to be anchoring and to be a safe container, you have to understand it, because otherwise, even if you happen to have been born here, it still sounds pretty foreign and strange to be talking about Druidry, for instance, or paganism or animism and so on. So yes, I think you're right. I think that's so. I mean, something you said, Andy, last year actually, when we were on here, you said like how you realized that, or you felt that Druidry and by inference other approaches too don't need psychedelics. In other words, they're perfectly sort of valid spiritual and transformative and sort of psychospiritual paths in themselves. They don't need psychedelics. However, the world of psychedelics, if people are going to make that choice to experiment with them or to use them, then there could possibly be a place for these kind of inspirations and inputs to create the containers. Yeah.
And there's a political imperative here, simply because, the first question about colonialism, we can't keep going to other people's countries and nicking their stuff as though it's just there for the taking. We just, we have to stop at some point.
Miles.
Let alone the air miles, yeah.
Thank you so much. I am Iranian, and since I was a kid, I was very interested, like, in the Rumi and Hafiz poetry, and I grew up reading it with my dad, and then you read Iranian poetry. It's a lot about spirituality. It's about connection to the nature and how you can connect to your spirit. And I started like going and understanding like the spiritual sites, from Zoroastrian temples to the very first mosques in my country. I studied architecture, so I was just curious about like all these temples that were made thousands of years ago, and a lot of the Zoroastrian temples are based on nature and based on the solstice. And then I traveled to America, and I got to learn about the South American culture, the Mayans, and when I visited their land, it was so similar in terms of like how they appreciated the nature, the stars, and how they could build temples according to the stars. And then when you learn, and then I did my first psychedelic like ceremony there, I just could understand Rumi and Hafiz much better. I was like, I didn't know what does this mean, and now I know it better. And I know the wine that Hafiz talks about is not the wine. And then that was just like a moment of understanding of like how Mayans are so similar to the Zoroastrians, and how like even like the post-Islamic poetry that comes from Iran is actually rooted in the very first civilizations that were there pre-Islam, and even like from the very first like Sumerian ziggurats that also existed in Iran, and the culture that came from them, and they were called Elamics, and a lot of like their art is like even in British museums, so you can go and find them and feel them, and then that journey took me toward the Celtics. And then I realized how Celtics are so similar to like the Mayans in terms of like the nature, in terms of the laws, in terms of like even the initiation. And I started understanding this universal language that existed in different locations without even connection to one another, which was so mind-blowing for me, like how they were so connected. And my last discovery was that Iran means the land of Aryans, when the Indo-Europeans went to Iran, they named it Iran, and it means land of Aryans. But then I realized Ireland comes from the word Ire, which means a noble land, which means land of Aryans too. And it was that like an ultimate connection of between like these two cultures. So I think my question is like, how have you like kind of like, is this like a story about the connection of these cultures and how they connected to one another, or in the Druidry history, and how does the initiation of a druid look like? Like how are you called, and how the past looks like when you walk the path?
Historically, we are all kind of culturally very interconnected. I mean, the Indo-European languages have, through the family tree, we're connected to Sanskrit and to Hindi and, you know, all those Persian languages, Arabic. You know, I was in India about 5 years ago doing a project, a storytelling project out there, working with Marwari musicians from the desert. And Dara, the Kamaicha player, was tuning his Kamaicha, and I didn't understand his language. It's a desert language, and we had an interpreter who could interpret between us. And he kept mentioning this word tant. And I said, tant. I said, can you just ask Dara what tant is? And he said, it's a string of an instrument, which is exactly the same word as Welsh. You know, there are all these connections. I think we tend to think that we were much more insular than we were. There was trade, you know, from very early on, all the way across the Mediterranean, the Orient, you know, all those places were trading. Ideas were traded. Certainly in the ancient myths, the Mabinogion of Wales, we can see traces of stories. These stories were born on the tongue in the oral tradition for thousands of years, and they borrowed from kind of the Greek tradition and this tradition and that tradition. So there was definitely kind of connection. But there's also the sense that wherever humanity is, we are all trying to express this sense of wonderment at this glorious creation and our connection with it. And the poets do it very well, of course. And, you know, we have beautiful poets in these lands too, Aneirin, Taliesin, the really ancient Druidic poets. They're all saying the same thing. It's just that as we get more and more cultured, we put more and more layers on it. And we, in some ways, sometimes we get further from the root truth, which for me is very animistic. It's very simple. The interconnectedness of all things. And so every culture finds that, you know, and in its early poetry, it's all always there. Do you want to talk about the initiation?
I've kind of not quite got the question about initiation. Was it just about, I'm sorry, but no, it's okay. I mean, just let me just say something about it. I think the process of initiation is very interesting. Again, it's found all over the world in many different cultures, and it's like opening a door. It's like a trigger. It's like it begins a process. And sometimes, you know, so we in our tradition we have various initiation ceremonies that you either do on your own or in a group, and sometimes this can trigger a very deep and profound kind of process of transformation. Sometimes it can feel simply symbolic, but when we look back, the interesting thing about initiations is they don't necessarily have this kind of instant wow factor about them. But when we look back, we can see, oh, that's interesting. You know, from that time onwards, my life changed slightly different direction. So sometimes it can be a very gentle kind of nudge to align you more directly with soul and with purpose and so on. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you, all of you, and all of the questions. This has been a fantastic. I'm sad it's going to be ending soon because the quality of the questions. These are dissertations. These are books to be written about the comments that people have made, and your introductions. I mean, I personally could relate to them all very deeply. I was a natural mystic. I took a very deep dive into psychedelics, scholar, academic, and I wanted to just add this element. and it's kind of fun because here we are in Britain, and I'm from Boston. And the first thing that I learned about LSD when I was 10 years old from my 5th grade teacher, who was a rascal, I said, what is LSD? What does LSD stand for? And she said, let's save democracy. And of course that went right over my little head. But you know, as years went by and I got deeply into the subject, I became particularly interested in Timothy Leary because he was a very unique character and I got to know him very well. He was a unique character, and what made him unique was that he turned psychedelics from a kind of esoteric, introspective, spiritual experience to political activity. He was a guy that wanted to change he was Irish, of course, you know, so you've got the Irish and the English, and I'm from Boston, and I was a colonist once in a kind of way. And so one of the things I noticed about the current Renaissance, and Rosalind, you mentioned this too, is that we're using these drugs for ourselves. And I see the most exciting part of the earlier period for me, Leary, and the political activity. I don't see any of that yet. I mean, we live in countries where the people are being ravaged by their leaders. If the American Revolution was timely, it's timely now for people of the world to unite against these corrupt, militaristic tyrants that steal our money and apply it to killing, while the people are subdued with all kinds of other things that your great British writer Aldous Huxley warned us about, including psychedelic drugs. So I just wanted to put that out there, and maybe we mix it up.
Thank you. And thank you for all of your work and all your contributions as well. And for your dissenting voice, which I always appreciate on Facebook whenever I see it. So thank you for being a dissenting voice with so much gravitas as well and integrity. Yeah, it's very dispiriting actually to see the kind of mainstream psychedelic world. It's if we look at the microcosm of the psychedelic field and expect to see the kind of values of kind of connectedness to self and others and the wider world, we really don't see it. We almost see the opposite, in fact, that it seems like when we are introducing psychedelics into a individualistic, consumer, self-focused culture, they are amplifying those qualities rather than changing them. So in some cases, in many cases. So, you know, people talk about, you know, do we want to put like LSD in the drinking water? And I don't think it would save democracy. I think what it would actually do is just amplify a lot of the kind of, individualistic, separated kind of culture that we are living in. So that's where I think that the bringing the sacred traditions and the group traditions and the Druidic traditions and all the other ones with that sense of the group coming together, because psychedelics are often used in a quite individualistic way and it's about me and my development. And what we often see is that it amplifies the ego. People become just much more messianic and self-obsessed. And I've seen so many colleagues that started in the psychedelic field like 10 years ago who used to be really quite lovely people. And I've seen so many people now become absolutely unbearable. And I hope no one thinks that about me, in which case please tell me and I'll go and hide in a cave. But yeah, so I think we really need to find ways of bringing these tools and medicines into more wholesome ways of using them. And I think for that we just need to find the safe pairs of hands to facilitate this work and to offer the medicine. So whether it's druids, whoever it is, we need to somehow develop kind of grassroots networks of people to offer the medicines to other people within the context of safety and trust and keeping the intention and the purpose of these medicines intact. And I always just come back to this idea of a kind of like global network of postmenopausal women who are the ones that I feel are going to lead this revolution most safely. The medicine women and to do this by the community, for the community, in a grassroots way. I mean, if we decided now as a group of people to find the most safe, experienced, lovely, kind-hearted postmenopausal women, we might let some men do it, maybe, but you know, if we want a general rule, I think that's the easiest one. And to organize ourselves, and obviously we have to do it in a way that doesn't just, you know, like, because of the illegality thing, we have to do it in tandem. But we need to start really organising ourselves. And actually, if anyone saw Helen and Norbert Hodges' talk earlier, all about localising, which is so important, and about like radical like food production networks and how we can start to organise in community, I think we can start to think of networks for food production and other things, and just sharing the tasks of modern life, which is so overwhelming that it prevents us from saving democracy because we're so focused on doing the washing. But if we can start to develop those networks, then in time, when it becomes possible, if we've got grounded, supported, well-established networks where we trust each other, where we know who the safe pairs of hands are, because the unsafe pairs of hands have been exposed, and there are many, many people using psychedelics who are unsafe pairs of hands, who are drawn to it because they want to be the one giving the medicines. We need time to see who those people are and to trust it, and that only comes in local communities. You can't discover that unless you spend many, many years with people, getting to see the way they respond. And then if we can organise ourselves locally and find those true elders, that's how we can, I think that's the only way we can save democracy, like psychedelics in a localised, grassroots, grounded network of postmenopausal women.
I think we've got time for one more question. There's somebody.
Hi. Firstly, thanks very much for sharing your wisdom. I greatly appreciate it. Listening to you has been beautiful. You may have just answered my question, but it's about along my journey I think someone told me that the druid was meant to know the oak, and that was a period of 8-year cycles. And our ancestors obviously had a much slower pace of life. In the modern day, we are fighting against a fast-changing ecosystem, and I just wonder, how do we integrate, as you've spoken about, you know, that relationship of like the robin and us now, and how do we move quickly to make a change, and yet our timescales are so, nature moves so slowly. I think I don't know, I'm not sure there's a question in there specifically, how do we marry those two things of like moving quickly and also moving at the pace of Mother Nature?
I mean, I think we've already talked about some of the things, small communities, bringing community together. One of the things that we really, really need to do is, the cult of the individual has gone just about as far as we should really be experimenting with it. I think it's really damaging us now. Going back to the sense that we were all kind of in kind of communal communities, that everybody was together, is tribal communities, is probably not going to work, but we have to find a way through to something else, a hybrid of those things in some way. And I think working with small groups collectively in community together, in local communities, on this patch of land, on this small patch of land, tending to it, on the land that you're on, is a part of that. And in terms of the one thing that, when the practices that we do, the practice that we start people off with always is going to sit in nature, to sit and to sit and to sit, to do it every day, because we are so disconnected from listening and feeling. And we have to turn up for that relationship. And if we're not turning up for it, we can't have it. We know it doesn't develop. It's the same thing with a friendship. If we're not turning up for a friend, that relationship doesn't develop. So that is one of the first things, is to try and find a way to slow ourselves down to the pace of a tree, to the pace of nature, because we're running too fast. We're running too fast for our own natures. We're really damaging ourselves. If there's a pandemic of loneliness, of anxiety, of all sorts of things, because we're running too fast. And just 15 minutes a day, sitting with a tree in your garden somewhere or with some plants and just being present really, really helps. And to listen deeply and start from there. And it's the simplest thing, but time and time again, over years of teaching these things, it's one of the most potent and powerful things that we can do. So we've come to the end of our time. We'd like to close in the similar kind of way to what we did this morning. This morning? Wow. If we could all just stand and sound, please. So let's start with the drone of Neiniau a theidiau. Hynafiaid yn llinach, diolch I chi am fod gyda ni prynhawn yma. Am y grandawiad, am y sgwrs, am y geiriau. Grandmothers and grandfathers, ancestors of our lineages, many as they are. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, for guiding our words and our questions, our listening and our discussions. We hope that through this gathering here today, we have found a way of healing a little of our human family that is so broken at this time. And this song and this understanding and this, dare I say it, love that I'm sensing in this song around us, we send it through the cracks into the earth to wherever really needs it at this time, and take a little of it with us to patch our own fragile souls. Diolch yn fawr I chi. Thank you very, very much.